Hi, Catherine. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Great to chat with you.
It's been an amazing journey for you. You've gone from, the girl who dreamed big to being the first Australian to wear the flag on your shoulder as an astronaut. And it's very exciting. But where did this come from?
It's definitely pinched me stuff and such an honour to have the chance not only to train as an astronaut, but then to become the first Australian astronaut wearing the Australian flag on their shoulder. It's a dream come true. It's definitely the culmination of a childhood dream. When I was a kid, I was the kind of kid that annoyed everyone around me with a lot of why questions. I never took a simple answer. I wanted to look under every rock, climb every tree. When I was learning to surf, I wanted to know why one wave had more energy than the other. I was just curious about the world around me and loved adventure and being out in the outdoors. So I think, a childhood natural curiosity, lends itself really well to adventure on new planets and new worlds. And I grew up in the northern beaches of Sydney where the sky was bright with stars. And when I looked through a pair of binoculars and could see more detail up there, I learned that, some of those stars were entire planets that no one had ever explored before at that time. And I just was really curious to do that. When I grew up and became a teenager, I really enjoyed reading science books and magazines and was blown away by how much remained to be discovered that could only be discovered through endeavors in space, space telescopes, space missions, astronaut science that they do in microgravity labs. And that was great. But then I realized, that Australia didn't even have a space agency, let alone a path to being an astronaut. So I took my career overseas and thought that's where I'd have to live. But with the start of the Australian Space Agency, I was able to come back home and contribute to green space capability here, which has been really wonderful.
And Australia's space capability has really taken off, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Australia has a long and proud history in space. We've been involved right from the beginning with our tracking stations, even having, doctors supporting with astronaut activities from the ground. But we didn't accelerate our activities in space until very recently, as you say. So it was really the miniaturization of space satellites to things called CubeSats, kind of like the size of a shoebox, that meant that startups and universities could start to develop their own space missions from the ground up. That really drove forward Australia's acceleration in space. A lot of the startups in Australia entering space advocated hard to have a space agency. A lot of international space agencies needed a front door for Australia to work with Australia, and everyone wants to work with Australia because we've got great things to bring to the global ecosystem. So this is where the space agency came from, and we emerged kind of being able to help tailor our industry for this more industrialized era than ever before. And one of my first jobs at the space agency, my first roles, I joined in 2019, was to build a team and look across our country, kind of technology scout into what capabilities we have both in space already and in adjacent sectors that could be applied to space. And also, what does Australia need space to do for it? Where could be benefit? And it was really incredible how much capability there was. And in order to, drive forward our strengths, things like, our automation system and field robotics from mining and agriculture, our remote medical capabilities, our capabilities in communication and data management for Earth observation, there are a number of programs put forward. One of them is called the Moon to Mars Initiative, which is Australia's exploration program. And one of the programs under that is a rover going back to the moon that went out to a public naming competition. It's called Ruba, and there's
Love it.
organisations. I love it too. There's organisations across the country that are working on developing the first concept for that, and that'll launch in the next decade. And that's going to go to the moon with the best of Australia's capability to work with NASA and support the global endeavour to explore the south pole of the moon. And, we do that because there's so much that we can learn about Earth there. The moon is sort of like a frozen time capsule of early Earth. The Earth and the moon are thought to have formed at the same time from a collision. And the Earth, it has weathering, it has plate tectonics. We can't see what it used to be, but the moon holds a lot of that information, and that can give us practical inputs into things like climate change models and so on. So lots to be done up there, and Australia's involved.
Yeah, and geographically, we're in a good position as well, for helping other countries wanting to be part of the Australian space station too, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So Australia, if you include its waters, are kind of under almost like one-fifth of the sky. We're a major player for the Southern Hemisphere in particular as we look out for deep space missions into the South Pole of the Moon. And this means that we've always been well sought after for communications, ground stations, for tracking also objects in space, things like space debris to help explore and use space more sustainably. And we're a great place to do launches and returns from as well, for Australia's interest, but also to help, Australia's economic growth through being involved in that with other organizations. But, one thing that our remoteness and our large and vast land also needs is space because, to be able to see and connect across our country requires that eye in the sky. So we stand to benefit more from space than many other nations because space ultimately, right, it's just a place. It's kind of like the ocean. And like the ocean, the industries that use the ocean, the industries that use space have breadth, but space is above us. So from space, you can hover above a single point or you can zip past really fast. And what you can see from up there, you can see phenomenon around the world. You can see like bushfires, you can see water quality, you can see remote industries and traffic and pollution. And what you can see, you can connect. So if you can see different remote communities, you can send information, you can send like positioning data for GPS for farmers and so on. So Australia has a lot to benefit from space there as well.
And it helps the environment too, doesn't it? Because even in mining, they used to just sort of like mine in any old area where they thought there was, potential, but now they can actually be much more specific.
Absolutely. So there's an Australian organisation that's using space to connect Internet of Things sensors on the ground that help us to more sustainably prospect for the minerals that we need for electric cars and so on in a way that's far more environmentally friendly and also cheaper. Space is absolutely essential as we go forward to try and help address climate change. From around the world, we have to monitor 55 essential climate variables, and more than half of them can only be monitored in like a precise and continuous manner from space. There's no other option. So the United Nations has a body called the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and they've actually got a really great website that talks about the role of space in every single one of the Sustainable Development Goals. For helping, getting clean water for quality of life around the world, having enough food for people to eat, whether that's by monitoring things from space or the research that's done in space to support, more resilient crops on Earth.
I learned a lot last year because I was working with Airbus, particularly Martin Rouse, who was
Mm.
based here in Australia then. You could see how much money is going to come into the Australian economy from the space industry and the other associated industries, which is very exciting. If I was young again, I'd be wanting a career in in your field. But you don't actually have to be an astronaut to be involved in this exciting new world.
Absolutely. So, the global space economy is predicted to triple over the next 10 years. It's an incredible economic opportunity for a country that we're not yet fully capturing. Also, like around the world, the kinds of things you can do in space are growing. Space is a whole industry. You can have any kind of job and just put the word space in front of it, and it's relevant. You don't just need engineers and scientists, although that's important. You need doctors, you need journalists, you need lawyers, you need program managers and accountants and everyone. So if people are interested in space, they can find a way to be part of it already. When I grew up, I wanted to be an astronaut. You know, most of my colleagues and myself, my student friends left Australia because we didn't see the way to develop the kinds of space missions we wanted to work on in our country at that time. Now, a young person doesn't even have to leave their state or territory to have a compelling career in space, and also to be able to, create, companies and startups that they can be applied to missions that they think are worth doing. There's many gaps that are not yet addressed, and so much opportunity for people to contribute.
That's what excites me is that, I think we could get many more young Australians to think in that direction. But you obviously did engineering and physics at Sydney University.
That's right.
How did you make that transition to being an astronaut?
Yeah, so I applied to study aeronautical space engineering and physics because I love space. I knew what physics was as a degree, but I didn't really understand engineering beyond like the definition of the term. And I applied just because it had the word space in the degree title. And I guess I'm just one example of someone that, that fascination of space has drawn me into a field I wouldn't necessarily otherwise have done, but that fits me really well and I really enjoy. Um, you know, 7 out of 10 Aussie kids want to be astronauts. Almost 9 out of 10 are fascinated by space. So I think it's a powerful fascination that we can use to help, kids to be curious and creative, whether they end up working in space or not. There's so many problems that the world needs addressing, and we need people with that fascination and confidence to
Yeah.
come through. But for me, after I did my degrees, I went overseas and did some master's degrees. I got the chance to live across more than 6 countries, some multiple times, to develop some of the coolest space missions that, well, I thought were really cool. Things like new ways to move around Mars, the human Orion vehicle, the service module that's sending people back to the moon, part of the International Space Station, concepts for the Lunar Gateway and Earth observation satellites, and others. And after about 10 years working as a space engineer internationally, the Australian Space Agency was set up, and I was able to come home and I worked to help grow Australian space capability, which was an incredible time. But I also have a British passport through my mother. And because of that, I was eligible to apply to the European Space Agency astronaut selection when they advertised, I think it was 2021. And I was so thrilled just to be able to apply, even though it had been, a lifelong dream. It's kind of something you put at the back of your mind and you say, okay, if I ever get the chance to apply, I hope I'm ready. But you have to get on with the career that you have. It's a cherry on the top of any STEM career. And so I was thrilled just to be able to apply. And then that was the start of an amazing adventure for a year and a half, 6 different knockout rounds, with a big pool of people. I think almost 23,000 people that were eligible applied across the more than 22 countries that make up the European Space Agency, which blows my mind. And each stage was, I didn't feel like I was going to get through. You're just surrounded by incredible talent and amazing people. And I was like, how did I get through? And they did it. But eventually you just trust in the process. And I got to the end and I passed. I was in the final 25 that passed all the criteria. And the European Space Agency then made an unsolicited offer to Australia to train me as an Australian if I represented Australia, if Australia backed me as the first Australian flagged astronaut. And that is the best outcome I could have hoped for, because I think like to become an astronaut was like a far-fetched dream. To become an Australian astronaut was an even crazier dream that I didn't even think was possible. So absolutely fantastic, not just for me, but for what it can unlock, I hope, for our country, for scientists and engineers to be involved in human spaceflight internationally. And that has been unlocked even just through the training. But I hope what this has done actually is accelerated the time frame to whenever the time is right for there to be an open call across Australia. Imagine what that would do for the dreams of young people that are fascinated by space.
Oh, Katherine, I think it's just so many young people would be so excited about that. I mean, I know a lot of young students who are doing the same course as you, that are part of our Women Love Tech community, and they'll get there because there's opportunity now to get there. Do you know what I mean? You've driven that path. We need those role models like you, and what a role model! I mean, tell
Thank
us
you.
who your role models have been.
I think that evolves over time. I never had like one perfect hero or anyone whose career I tried to follow. I kind of had to write my own story, but I had lots of people along the way that you learn little things from. Obviously, when you're young, your parents and teachers have a large influence, and I was very fortunate there to have great encouragement. The workplace, in particular, most of my managers, gave me good tips and guidance about how to progress. I remember like one of the first mentors I had was when I was a graduate at Airbus in the UK, and they just said, like when you have the capacity, say yes to the extra work. When someone from another team comes in and says, hey, do you want to do this small job on this satellite? Even if it might seem not particularly exciting, you meet new people, you learn more. Someone else said, take the coffee breaks, because what you learn there is as important as sitting in front of your desk. And I'd sit down and hear about all the missions my colleagues are working on, the challenges they were having, what happened, lessons learned from old missions, just in social chat. And that was really eye-opening. So that, I think, just as important as formal training courses.
Now you're also working with Lego, who are doing an amazing project. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Australian Space Agency has partnered together with LEGO because there's a common interest in using space to foster curiosity and careers amongst young people towards STEM and just in general to, back themselves when they have big dreams and to use that, the power of imagination to give kids that courage to explore possibilities for their future. And so, yeah, there was a couple of really interesting things that came out of that. One is that where I was training at the European Space Agency, there is a lab there called Spaceship EEC where they do a lot of tech and ALM 3D printing there as well. And when humans go back to the moon, we're going to have to learn a bit how to use the resources that are up there because it, is a big effort to move mass out to the moon. So they had the idea to see if they could 3D print Lego bricks, where one of the main ingredients was lunar regolith simulant and a bit of meteorite dust as well. And they found that they could do it, and the bricks actually worked. So that was another way. Maybe you could make small structures that you could house experiments in that inside a habitat, or maybe you can even go bigger and do something on a grander scale outside. And so they're called Lego Space Bricks. They're on display at the Lego store in Sydney and in other stores around the world. And actually, just after I returned to Australia yesterday, there was a meet and greet at the Lego school, like open invitation for anyone that's interested. And it was wild. There were so many people. I think they had to stop people coming in, all these kids with the most wonderful question in astronauts. So it's really excited. And it gave me so much energy to see that level of excitement for their future.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. We're just about to launch a mentoring platform on Women Love Tech, and because it's so important to have advice and a good mentor along the way. Um, your role now as a sort of like an ambassador, really, for like a role model for women in STEM is huge. What can we do to change the gender gap that we've got, the divide of so few women taking up roles in tech and STEM in general, to change that? I mean, one thing is obviously someone like you talking about an amazing career that you've been able to forge and actually having to, as you say, make your own story.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and it's a nutty problem to solve. I don't think that there's a simple one-stop solution. For young people, there's a few things. One is just even awareness of what these careers are. Like I didn't know what engineering was. And that's still a problem, I understand, for young women in particular. It's people seeing career roles sometimes as gendered. Like I had a friend who had a 4-year-old daughter who reached out after I started training and said, my 4-year-old daughter has an astronaut costume, but she didn't want to put it on because she thought astronauts were for boys already at 4. And when she was able to show the picture of me and the other women I was training with to her, she got excited and felt like she could then wear it. Like that blew my mind that already at that age, it's, part of societal fabric already and to be overcome. I think it's also that feeding into that, it's that stereotype. There's a stereotype in most people's minds of what a typical scientist or engineer or technical person is. And certainly throughout my career, I've been underestimated because I don't necessarily fit that box. Even as a teenager, I wasn't a tinkerer or a coder just because I wasn't really aware of that world. Like I was more into the science, but once I was exposed to it, I really enjoyed it. So people shouldn't, I think part of it is judgment and realizing that, STEM is for everyone, space is for everyone. And just because someone doesn't fit that typical look or the hobbies of those people doesn't mean they're not a great engineer. I think or scientist. At university, a lot of the focus is on the analysis part of engineering, whereas it's a lot more than that in the workplace. End-to-end engineering, there's a lot of other roles which you require experience to enter. Things like, early stage mission concepts and innovations, working in teams, having that umbrella, like system engineering rather than the analysis that people might not realize that they're good at and therefore think they're not good engineers if they're not good analysts. And so that's part of it as well. But yeah, so it's that role modeling. It is showing that there is a place for everyone. One other thing I did notice is that to help overcome that, I noticed that a lot of women that started studying engineering and science at university usually did it because they were driven by a particular type, kind of purpose driven. So I was drawn in for space. Some people were drawn in because they're like biomedical. Not so many women came in because they just wanted to do engineering. And I think that's because to be drawn in, they needed that topic because they weren't exposed to what engineering is. But I think just in general, having a more purpose-driven approach to STEM rather than just wanting to work in STEM helps. Like if a young kid comes to me and says, "Oh, I want to be an astronaut," or "I want to work in space," like that's great. Like you should absolutely pursue that. But think about why. Like, yes, you need to enjoy the day to day, but if you think about like what you want to discover, what you want to help solve, that is far more of a driving force in being able to get through that slog of the early stages of your education and your career to get to the point where you can concretely contribute. So that's another angle I would take.
I think that's really, really a good point, because there's so much that, examples of space being, a great teacher for us for what can be good for life on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
As an astronaut, of course, you have experiences of being in the gravity zero um, areas. What's that like?
Oh, absolutely incredible. So, like on our astronaut training, one of the kinds of things we did was, immersing ourselves in an analogous space environment as far as possible for training. So we did things like went in a centrifuge and felt the G forces of launch and re-entry. So we did a typical Soyuz launch and Dragon launch with the rocket staging and the re-entry different activities. And that was incredible. As an astronaut, you feel the G force front to back rather than head to foot, which is like a pilot. So it was about the breathing techniques, knowing you could handle that. Um, and there were surprises like, when they pull the G-force off between the rocket staging and the simulation, you felt like you were tumbling forward and backwards, just the way that the inner ear plays tricks on you. So knowing those kinds of things is helpful before you go up. I also went in a zero-G plane with my classmates, some of the JAXA, the Japanese astronaut candidates, and some flown astronauts to learn how to get used to that environment too. Things like, using a drill. If you don't brace, you'll spin. Doing CPR, you kind of do a handstand on the person and squat on the roof to do your compressions. How to use your feet to walk around without, kicking your toe and therefore floating off. So you've got your hands free to do work on the space station and lots of things like that. But that was incredible because, we just couldn't wipe the smiles off our faces. It's hard to imagine that that would be a normal working environment for us in the future, that you just be normal life.
Yeah. There's so much, like RMIT just did a study that came out today saying even food tastes differently in space.
It's true. So in space, it's thought mostly due to the fluid shift. If you kind of hang upside down, your head gets a bit heavy. It's a little bit like that in space. It's kind of like a tilted angle back. And it changes over time how like puffy your face gets and not. But part of it is apparently it feels like you have a bit of a cold, like you're a bit stuffy and your taste is a bit dulled, which means that you crave spicy and salty foods a lot. Like Tabasco sauce is like a hot commodity up there, in not just literally. And that's really important as part of the psychological health of the crew to enjoy their food and their meal time. So there's a lot of effort that goes into making food taste good as well as being nutritious and healthy.
I'm about to interview the director of NASA's space station, a woman, in fact.
Yeah.
And her plan is, NASA's main mission now is to get to Mars. So it's not even the moon, is it?
Yeah, it's both. So it's the moon and then Mars. They're complementary because the moon's much closer. We can test out a lot of the technologies that we need to go to Mars. Mars still has some big technological hurdles to overcome. Things like, being able to get a rocket refueled and off the planet to come back is important. So yeah, that will be in the decades to come. It's often said that the first person to walk on Mars is in a school classroom today. That could be an Australian classroom if we want it to be. So yeah, the opportunities there are incredible. But we don't just go to push the frontiers of humanity. We don't just go because science is beautiful, but we go because there's so many learnings for us here on Earth. Even the search for life, which sounds really out there and abstract, is important for Earth. On Earth we've got extremophiles kind of life that's around things like undersea vents or in extreme conditions. And the study of that and extraterrestrial life helps us to understand, how do we make life on Earth more resilient? How did life on Earth evolve? How will it adapt to things like climate change or other stresses, and how can we protect it? So it's a really interesting topic. We learn about that in the astronaut training as well.
Yeah, those existential risks that humanity faces, like that's pivotal, isn't it? In like what we can learn from space.
Absolutely. So, to look at these kind of species level discovery activities, there requires so many countries to be involved and learn from each other and go and explore together. And it's so much more than just about the space sector. It's really got to involve the whole of society, because the whole of society benefits and is needed to push this forward. And for an emerging space nation like Australia to work in that international ecosystem on answering the big questions is the best way to learn and the best way for our industry to be able to access that economic opportunity, I think, because there's room to play and we need it and we can bring our skills to bear there.
Well, Katherine, you're an amazing role model. Thank you so much for being a role model to so many people. And for those who want to dream big, have you got one message that you'd like to share with that person who might be in the classroom now, thinking about what their future career is going to be?
I would say if you have a dream and you think it's worthwhile doing and it's something you'd enjoy, you should absolutely pursue it without hesitation. Don't be concerned if you're a minority. Don't be concerned if you don't think you can do it. No one's going to, pursue that for you. So if you put in every effort, you're giving yourself the best chance possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Katherine, for your time today.
Thanks so much. That was great.